What if, and this is a big what if something that once paralyzed entire nations could actually be systematically dismantled, like decade by science?
Yeah,
That's the incredible journey of the polio vaccine.
it is.
So today, we're taking a deep dive into over 90 years of research that led to its near eradication.
We are.
We're not just looking at the timeline, but like the how and the why behind each breakthrough.
Yeah, we're going to go like decade by decade, showing you how each discovery kind of built upon the last one, leading to, honestly, a near miracle in public health.
I mean, think about this for a second. We're talking about a disease that really terrified parents. I mean, it caused widespread paralysis and there was no cure.
Oh, it's devastating.
But through scientific ingenuity, we're on the verge of just like wiping it off the planet.
It's a true testament to the power of research and what we can accomplish with global cooperation.
I mean, it's amazing. Are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Okay, so let's start with the 1930s,
Okay.
a time when polio was still like shrouded in mystery.
Right.
Scientists were really grappling to understand this disease that seemed to strike at random, mostly affecting children.
Yeah, and in the early 1930s, researchers were just starting to understand like the very basics of the polio virus. Crucial early discovery came from the work of Burnett and McNamara.
Okay.
They were able to show that the polio virus could adapt to and grow in animal tissues,
Specifically.
specifically monkey brains and spinal cords.
Okay, so why was that like such a big deal? I mean, that sounds pretty intense, like using monkey brains.
It was a huge step forward, even if it does sound a little creepy by today's standards.
Yeah.
This discovery meant that scientists could finally study the virus in a more controlled environment, outside of the human body. And it was a key step toward understanding the virus's behavior and developing, potential vaccines.
So it's like they had a way to like cultivate the virus,
Right.
to grow it for research, kind of like cultivating plants, but with a virus instead of seeds.
Exactly, exactly. Cultivating the virus in a lab setting allowed for much more controlled experiments and observations.
But as with any scientific endeavor, right, there were early setbacks.
Oh, for sure.
In the mid-1930s, Brody and Colmer, they attempted to create a vaccine. Unfortunately, their trials didn't go as planned.
Right. Some people who received their vaccine experienced really severe complications, and it wasn't even clear if the vaccine provided any protection at all.
So, a major setback.
Definitely.
But as you said earlier, science is about building on both successes and failures.
Exactly. And these early trials, while, ultimately unsuccessful, they were incredibly important because they highlighted the need for rigorous safety testing. They also emphasized the need for a much deeper understanding of the virus before a safe and effective vaccine could be developed.
So therefore, the scientific community learned some really valuable lessons, not only about what not to do, but also the importance of careful and ethical research.
Absolutely. And, towards the end of the 1930s, there was another development that would really shape the fight against polio.
Okay.
The creation of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, or NFIP.
Okay.
With President Roosevelt's involvement, a figure who understood the impact of polio firsthand, the NFIP became a real powerful force in the fight against the disease.
So this wasn't just another research study. This was a major shift in how research was organized and funded.
Precisely. The NFIP was instrumental in providing the funding, the infrastructure, the coordination, all the things that polio research really needed to move forward. It brought together some of the brightest minds in science and created a framework for, the major breakthroughs that were to come.
So by the end of the 1930s, we had like a more robust understanding of the virus.
Yeah.
And there was like a newfound commitment to tackling the disease head on.
Yeah, the pieces were starting to fall into place.
But the real breakthroughs were still on the horizon.
You're right. Oh, absolutely. The 1940s saw some of the most pivotal discoveries in the history of polio research. Discoveries that would lay the foundation for the vaccines that we know today.
Okay, so let's move on to the 1940s and see what happened. What were some of those key discoveries that like set the stage for the development of effective vaccines?
The 1940s were a time of remarkable progress, really, in polio research. Scientists were making discoveries that would fundamentally change our understanding of the virus, and you know how to fight it.
So it sounds like the momentum was really building. What were some of the key findings that paved the way for vaccine development?
One of the most surprising discoveries came in 1941
Okay.
with the work of researchers John Paul and James Trask. They found that the poliovirus wasn't just present in the nervous system, but also in throat secretions and stool of infected individuals.
Wait, so it wasn't just about protecting the nervous system, but like understanding how the virus was spreading through these like other pathways. That must have had huge implications for like controlling outbreaks,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. This finding really revolutionized our understanding of, how polio spreads. It helped to explain why outbreaks often occurred in areas with poor sanitation and contaminated water,
Yeah.
because the virus could be transmitted through fecal-oral routes.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, the virus is present in stool, then contaminated water, or just like poor hygiene could easily spread the infection.
Yeah.
But how did this discovery like change the approach to vaccine development?
Well, realizing that the virus was present in the gut, it meant that a truly effective vaccine would need to generate not just systemic immunity protecting the whole body, but also like local immunity in the gut,
Yeah.
to block the virus right at its point of entry.
So like a two-pronged approach was needed. It
Exactly.
wasn't just about preventing the virus from like reaching the nervous system, but like stopping it from taking hold in the body in the first place.
Precisely. And that's where the groundbreaking work of John Enders, Frederick Robbins, and Thomas Weller really comes in.
Okay.
In 1948, they achieved something truly remarkable. They figured out how to grow poliovirus in non-nervous tissue cultures.
I'm going to need you to break that down for me. What exactly does that mean? And why was it so important?
Okay, sure. So before their discovery, scientists had to rely on cultivating the virus in monkey nervous tissue,
Huh?
which was not only expensive and difficult to obtain, but also posed some ethical concerns.
Right.
But Enders, Weller, and Robbins, they found a way to grow the virus in cultures of just regular cells, a technique that was way more efficient and accessible.
So they made studying the virus like easier, cheaper, and more ethical. That sounds like a Nobel Prize-worthy discovery to me.
You're right, they did win the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1954 for their work.
Wow.
And it was a game changer, really, for polio research, paving the way for both Salk and Sabin's vaccine development, which we'll get to in a bit.
Okay.
But it's amazing to see how one discovery can have such a ripple effect, opening up entirely new avenues of research.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Absolutely. And speaking of important discoveries, in 1949, David Bodian made another crucial contribution to understanding the polio virus.
Okay.
He identified the multiple serotypes of the virus,
Right.
types 1, 2, and 3.
So not just one type of poliovirus, but three. Why was that significant for, like, vaccine development?
It meant that any effective vaccine would need to protect against all three types of poliovirus to be truly effective. This added another layer of complexity to the challenge.
Just like trying to hit three moving targets at once.
Right?
It's incredible to see how scientists were slowly, piecing together the puzzle of this complex virus.
It was a massive, collaborative effort. And by the end of the 1940s, researchers had laid the groundwork, really, for vaccine development. They understood how the virus spread, they could grow it in a lab, and they knew about the different serotypes. The stage was set for, the breakthroughs of the 1950s, a decade that would see the first effective polio vaccines come to life.
And I bet that's where the name Jonas Salk comes in. So let's move on to the 1950s, a decade that would change the course of polio history. The 1950s, truly a turning point in the fight against polio. It's the decade when, the dream of a vaccine really started to become, a reality.
Yeah, definitely.
But, the story, it wasn't over yet, right? There were still challenges to overcome. And, that scientific journey, it continued.
You're absolutely right. The 1950s, they saw the development of not just one, but two successful polio vaccines.
Wow.
And the research, it didn't stop there. Scientists continued to study the virus. They refined the vaccines and they developed strategies for their global distribution.
So let's talk about the 1950s. This is the decade where, Jonas Salk's name becomes, synonymous, right?
Right.
With the polio vaccine.
Yes. In 1953, Salk, he published the results of his initial trials of the inactivated polio vaccine, or IPV. This was the, killed virus approach, where the polio virus was rendered inactive, but still capable of triggering an immune response in the body.
So the virus was essentially disarmed,
Right.
but could still, teach the immune system how to fight it off.
Right. Exactly.
What were, the initial reactions to Salk's vaccine?
The early trials were incredibly promising. The IPV was shown to generate strong antibody responses, suggesting that it could potentially offer a significant protection against paralytic polio. It was a huge step forward, and there was a lot of excitement surrounding Salk's work.
And then came the massive 1954 Francis Field trial, right?
Yes.
I've heard about this. It was like a landmark event in medical history, wasn't it?
Absolutely. This trial was like monumental in both scale and impact.
Okay.
Over 1 million school children were involved.
1 million children. That's
It
mind-boggling.
was the largest medical trial ever conducted at that time.
Wow. What did the trial reveal about the effectiveness of Salk's vaccine?
The results were really conclusive. The Salk IPV, safe and effective. The trial showed that the vaccine could reduce the incidence of paralytic polio by up to 90%. It was a major victory, for science, for public health, and for humanity.
I mean, imagine the relief that parents must have felt,
Yeah,
knowing that their children could be protected from this, devastating disease.
absolutely.
It must felt like a miracle.
It really was a remarkable achievement. And, the Salk vaccine, it quickly became a cornerstone of polio prevention efforts worldwide,
Hmm.
leading to widespread immunization campaigns and just a dramatic decline in cases.
But even as Salk's vaccine was being, celebrated, another scientist was working on a different approach, right?
Yes, while Salk was developing his inactivated vaccine, Albert Sabin was researching a live attenuated oral polio vaccine,
What?
or OPV.
Okay, so two different vaccine approaches, both aimed at the same goal, right?
Wow.
Protecting people from polio.
Right.
What was the thinking behind Sabin's, live vaccine?
So Sabin's OPV used a weakened version of the live polio virus.
Right.
The idea was that this weakened virus could still replicate in the gut, triggering a strong immune response, but it wouldn't cause disease.
So the body would, learn to fight off the virus, but without actually experiencing the full-blown illness.
Yeah.
That sounds like a pretty clever strategy.
It was, and it had some advantages, really, over the inactivated vaccine.
Right.
For one, it was much easier to administer. Just a few drops, no needles required.
Oh, yeah.
This made it more appealing, for children, and it was simpler to deliver in mass vaccination campaigns.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Especially when you're, trying to reach large populations,
Yeah.
sometimes in areas with limited healthcare resources.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Plus, because the OPV, it replicated in the gut, it could potentially block the virus at its point of entry, and reduce transmission within communities.
So two powerful tools in the fight against polio. It's incredible to see this kind of scientific innovation happening, in parallel.
It really is. And the 1960s, they saw both the Salk and Sabin vaccines, making significant strides, on the global stage.
Okay.
Large-scale trials of the OPV took place in the USSR, demonstrating its, feasibility and effectiveness on a massive scale.
And what was, the impact of these large-scale trials?
The results were, astounding. Polio rates plummeted, in the regions where the OPV was administered. And this success led to, wider adoption of the OPV around the world. By 1963, the World Health Organization, or WHO, issued reports, solidifying the global consensus on the OPV's safety and benefits.
So we're moving from national efforts to, a coordinated global approach.
Yeah.
The dream of eradicating polio, it was becoming more realistic.
Absolutely.
So the 1970s saw a focus on, refining both the polio vaccines and the strategies for their use.
Right.
Scientists were delving, deeper into the structure of the poliovirus itself, which led to even more targeted vaccination approaches.
That's right.
It's amazing to see how science never stands still, even with successful vaccines in hand. Researchers were still looking for ways to, improve and optimize them.
Absolutely. For example, in 1977, trials began comparing the trivalent OPV, which contained all three poliovirus serotypes, to monovalent versions, which targeted just one serotype at a time.
So instead of a one-size-fits-all approach, they were developing more specialized tools.
Exactly. And the results were, impressive.
Okay.
The monovalent OPVs, they were highly effective against specific serotypes, allowing for more targeted and efficient vaccination campaigns.
This level of precision must have been a game changer for controlling outbreaks and focusing resources where they were most needed, right?
It was. And as the science progressed, so did the results. In 1979, a historic milestone was reached. The last case of wild polio was recorded in the United States.
Wow, what a moment.
Yeah.
That must have been such a testament to the decades of research, the dedication of public health officials, and the power of widespread vaccination.
It was a triumph for science, really, and a beacon of hope for the rest of the world. It proved that polio eradication, it was achievable.
So the success in the U.S., it really set the stage, right, for the global eradication efforts that followed.
The 1980s saw a shift towards regional and global eradication strategies. In 1985, the Pan American Health Organization, or PAHO, launched a regional polio eradication effort that proved incredibly successful. They used coordinated immunization days, improved surveillance, and targeted mop-up campaigns to reach every last child. And this success provided a blueprint, really, for the global eradication initiative that followed.
So taking lessons learned from regional successes and, like, applying them on a global scale.
Precisely. And in 1988, the World Health Organization, they made a bold resolution to eradicate polio by the year 2000. It was an ambitious goal, but one backed by decades of research showing that eradication was, within reach.
So what were some of the, like, key strategies used in the global eradication effort?
One of the most important concepts was herd immunity. The idea that if enough people are immunized, the virus can't spread, even among those who aren't vaccinated. The focus was on, reaching high enough vaccination rates to interrupt the transmission of the virus entirely.
So protecting the community as a whole, not just individuals. It's a powerful example of how, like, public health measures can have a ripple effect, right? Benefiting everyone.
The 1990s saw, continued progress toward eradication,
Uh-huh.
with the Americas achieving a major milestone.
Okay.
In 1991, the last case of wild polio in the Americas was reported, and by 1994, the region was certified polio-free.
Another, like, incredible achievement. This must have given a huge boost to the global eradication efforts, right? Proving that it can be done?
It did, but the fight, it wasn't over yet.
Okay.
The 1990s also saw the emergence of a new challenge:
Which was?
vaccine-derived polioviruses, or VDPVs.
I've, like, heard about this. It's a bit of a paradox. Right?
Yeah.
The vaccine itself, in rare cases, could lead to new outbreaks.
Yeah, it's a complex issue, but, essentially the weakened virus in the OPG. It could, in very rare cases, revert to a form capable of causing outbreaks, particularly in areas with low vaccination rates.
So a new hurdle to overcome. How did the scientific community respond to this challenge?
The benefits of the OPV, they still far outweighed the risks. But, steps were taken to, mitigate the potential for VDPVs. In 1999, the U.S. switched from using the OPV to the IPV for routine immunization, a strategic move to minimize the risk of VDPVs while maintaining, high levels of immunity.
So constantly adapting, right, and refining strategies based on new knowledge. The fight against polio, it's been a dynamic process, hasn't it?
Absolutely. The 2000s saw the global eradication efforts, continuing with remarkable success. The Global Polio Eradication Initiative, or GPEI, was making significant progress with data showing massive drops in cases worldwide.
It's so inspiring to see the impact of, like, coordinated global efforts, isn't it?
Yeah. It is. One of the key innovations in the 2000s was the introduction of combination vaccines, allowing children to receive multiple vaccines, including the IPV, in a single shot.
Making immunization more, convenient and efficient, right? It's all about removing those barriers and making it easier for people to protect themselves and their communities.
The 2010s saw a continued focus on optimizing, vaccine formulations and strategies, getting even more targeted, really, in the fight against polio.
So even with the finish line in sight, the scientific community wasn't letting up.
In 2013, studies showed that a bivalent OPV, which contained only types 1 and 3 of the polio virus, was highly effective. Type 2 wild polio virus, it had already been eradicated. So this bivalent vaccine allowed for a more focused approach. And in 2016, there was a global switch from the trivalent to the bivalent OPV, a massive undertaking that demonstrated, the power of coordinated global health efforts.
A true testament to what can be accomplished when, the world works together.
Absolutely. And even as we celebrate the near eradication of polio, scientists, they continue to work toward a polio-free future.
Yeah.
In 2019, new, even more stable OTV strains were developed, further minimizing the risk of VDPVs.
Yeah.
It's a story that shows how science is a constantly evolving process, always striving for improvement.
The polio vaccine journey, it's a testament to human ingenuity, perseverance, and the power of collaboration. It's a story that gives us hope that even the most daunting challenges can be overcome.
It also serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of scientific research, public health initiatives, and, global cooperation. The fight against polio is a victory for humanity, and it shows us what's possible when we work together towards a common goal.
So from those early fumbles in the 1930s through decades of research and innovation to the brink of global eradication, The polio vaccine story, it's an incredible reminder of what science can achieve.
It is.
It's a story that should inspire us all. And it leaves us with a question, with polio almost eradicated, what other seemingly impossible health challenges might science conquer next? And what role can each of us play in supporting those efforts?
That is a great question to ponder, indeed. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the history of the polio vaccine.
Until next time.